My best friend of 14 years cooked my birthday dinner, and my mute son wouldn't let me take a single bite. He was 9 years old, standing beside my chair with both hands pressed flat on the table, shaking his head so hard his hair fell across his forehead. His eyes, those huge brown eyes that have always said everything his voice couldn't, were filled with something I hadn't seen in them before. Not fear, exactly, something older than fear. Honey, I reached for his wrist gently. It's okay, it smells delicious. He shook his head again, harder this time. His fingers found my sleeve and pulled. I looked at my best friend across the table. She smiled. The same smile she'd had since college. Warm and easy and familiar. He's probably just tired, she said. You know how he gets when it's late. She wasn't wrong. My son Theo, I've always called him by his middle name, has sensory days when everything overwhelms him. He goes quiet even by his own standards, which is already very quiet. It was almost 9 o'clock past his usual bedtime, and I'd let him stay up because it was my birthday and I wanted him near me. But he kept pulling my sleeve, and something about the way he looked at me made me set down my fork. My name is Lucy. I'm 31 years old and I work as a pediatric occupational therapist in Columbus, Ohio. Which is a funny thing to say out loud because I spend my days helping children communicate, and my own son hasn't spoken a single word in his entire life. Theo was born with a condition affecting his vocal cords and his speech language processing. Doctors gave it a long name that I can barely pronounce even now. The short version is that he hears everything, understands everything, feels everything. But the sounds won't come out. He uses a communication board, some sign language we developed together, and mostly just his face, which is the most expressive face I have ever seen on any human being. He is also the most perceptive person in any room he enters, always has been. When he was 4 years old, he kept pointing at his smoke detector in my parents' kitchen, 3 days before the battery actually died. Nobody listened. My father finally changed it when the beeping started. My mother laughed and said Theo saw things the rest of us just walked past. She wasn't wrong. His father and I separated when Theo was 2. It wasn't violent or dramatic, just two people who got together young and slowly turned into strangers. He moved to Portland, pays his child support on time, visits 4 times a year, loves Theo in the way a person loves someone they don't fully know yet. I don't hold it against him. We are civil, we are fine. But for most of Theo's life, it's been the two of us in our little house on Fielding Street figuring things out together. That's why my best friend stepping in the way she did felt like a gift. Her name is Cassandra, but she's gone by Cassie since we met freshman year of college at Ohio State. We lived 2 doors down from each other in the dorm and bonded over bad dining hall coffee and a shared hatred of the fire alarm that went off every Thursday at 3 in the morning without fail. We were inseparable by October. She was my maid of honor. She was in the waiting room when Theo was born. She cried harder than I did when his father and I announced the separation. She's the kind of friend you don't find twice in a lifetime. At least, that's what I believed for 14 years. When I became a single mother with a nonverbal child and a full-time job and a mortgage that felt like a living creature sitting on my chest, Cassie showed up. That's the only way to describe it. She just showed up. She started coming over on Tuesday and Thursday evenings to have dinner with us, help Theo with his homework, read to him before bed. She learned his communication board so well that sometimes she understood him faster than I did. I watched them together and felt something I can only call grace. The relief of not being completely alone. She also, I should mention, had been going through her own difficult stretch. A long-term relationship had ended badly about a year ago. The guy had been someone she'd introduced me to a handful of times. Quiet, a little distant, the type who makes you feel like you're always on the edge of a conversation that hasn't started yet. When they broke up, she didn't say much about what happened. Just that it was over, and she was glad to be out of it. I didn't push. That's not how we worked. So she had more time, and I needed more help, and it felt like the kind of thing the universe does when it's being kind to you. My birthday fell on a Thursday this year. March 20th, technically the first day of spring, which I've always taken as a small sign that I'm supposed to enjoy my life. Cassie insisted on cooking dinner. Don't order anything, don't step foot in the kitchen, she said over the phone that morning. I'll be there at 6. Just get yourself some flowers and take a bath before I arrive. I laughed and said she didn't have to go to that much trouble. It's your birthday, she said. Let me do something nice for you. I let her. She arrived at 6:15 with 2 bags of groceries and a bottle of wine. She'd made pasta with a white wine cream sauce from a recipe she said she found online, garlic bread wrapped in foil, and a small salad. It smelled extraordinary. The kitchen filled up with warmth and the sound of her moving around, the familiar clink of pots and the easy conversation she kept tossing over her shoulder at me while I sat at the kitchen table drinking a glass of the wine. Theo was upstairs doing his reading. He came down at 7:30 when dinner was almost ready, took one look at the table being set and went quiet in a way that I didn't notice because Theo is always quiet. We sat down. The food was plated beautifully. Cassie had even lit the 2 candles I kept on the dining room table for guests. The tall white ones I'd bought at Target 6 months ago and never used. Happy birthday to my favorite person, she said, raising her glass. She looked at Theo. And to the second best person at this table. He didn't smile back. She didn't seem to notice. She lowered her glass and started twirling pasta onto her fork. I reached for mine, and Theo's hand came down flat on the table between us. He wasn't looking at Cassie. He was looking at me. That look again, that older than his years thing in his eyes that I hadn't been able to name all evening. He shook his head once, very deliberately. Theo. I said his name quietly, the way I do when I want him to know I'm paying attention. He pointed at me, then at the plate, then shook his head again. I set my fork down. Cassie laughed softly. Sweetie, are you worried about the food? I promise it's good. I made it specially for your mom's birthday. He didn't look at her at all. He slid off his chair, came around the table to me, and took my hand. His grip was tighter than I expected. He started pulling me toward the living room, toward the couch where he'd left his tablet charging. Theo, baby, what? He let go of my hand, grabbed the tablet, swiped it open, and pulled up his camera roll. He handed it to me. There was a video. It was shaky and dim, shot from what I could tell was the gap between the pantry door and the wall, a 3-inch space he apparently wedged himself into at some point while Cassie was cooking. The timestamp in the corner read 7:04 p.m. In the video, Cassie was standing at the stove with her back to the pantry. She stirred the sauce for a moment, then stopped. She looked toward the hallway, checking, I realized, making sure she was alone. Then she set down the spoon and reached into the front pocket of her cardigan. She pulled out a small amber-colored prescription bottle. My vision went strange. On the screen, she unscrewed the cap, shook something into her palm. I couldn't see what. The resolution wasn't good enough. Then she held her hand over the pot and let it fall in. She stirred for 10 seconds, put the bottle back in her pocket, picked up a wine glass from the counter, and took a slow sip like nothing had happened. The video ended. I stood in my living room holding my son's tablet, and I genuinely could not feel my hands. Behind me from the dining table, Cassie's voice drifted uneasy and warm. Everything okay in there? Food's getting cold. I turned around slowly. She was still sitting at the table, her fork resting against the edge of her plate. She had not touched her food either, I noticed. Her wine glass was in her hand. She was looking toward the living room with a pleasant, slightly curious expression. Theo was pressed against my side with both arms around my waist. Come sit down, she said. We should eat while it's hot. I don't know how I managed to keep my voice steady. I think it's the same mechanism that kicks in when a parent hears a loud clash and goes calm and deliberate instead of panicking, because someone smaller than you needs you not to panic. I'm going to run to the bathroom real quick, I said. Give me just a second. I walked down the hall with Theo at my heels, closed the bathroom door behind us, and sat on the edge of the tub. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type, but I found my phone and I called 911. I kept my voice just above a whisper. I told them someone had put something in my food. I told them she was still in my dining room. I gave them my address. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line and stay away from the food. I told Theo to stay close to me and not to eat or drink anything. He nodded. He already knew. We walked back out to the living room. I sat on the couch. I told Cassie I wasn't feeling well suddenly. Maybe it was the wine on an empty stomach, and I just needed to sit for a few minutes. She brought her wine glass with her and sat in the armchair across from me, and we talked. She asked about my week. She told me something funny that happened at her office. She was completely, perfectly normal. I kept thinking 14 years of Thursday dinners and holiday gifts and holding each other through every hard thing. I kept thinking she didn't touch her food. The knock on the door came about 8 minutes later. Cassie's expression shifted, just slightly. A flicker of something that moved through her eyes and disappeared so fast, I would have missed it if I hadn't been watching her like my life depended on it. Rich, as it turned out, it did. Are you expecting someone? She asked. No, I said. I opened the door. Two police officers. I stepped aside to let them in. Cassie stood up from the armchair. What's going on? Her voice was still calm, but it had changed texture, thinner somehow, like fabric stretched too tight. One of the officers explained that they'd received a call about a potential concern at this address. He asked if anyone else was in the home. I said just us, just me and my son, and my friend. He asked about the food. I handed him Theo's tablet and showed him the video. I watched Cassie watch the screen. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she looked at me, not at the officers, and said, Lucy, I can explain. And the worst part was that she sounded almost gentle, like she was about to explain why she'd forgotten to pick something up from the store. I shook my head. I couldn't speak. The officers took the tablet, took the food, and took Cassie. She went without resistance. She didn't cry or scream. She just picked up her cardigan from the back of the armchair, pulled it on like she was leaving after a normal dinner, and walked out my front door. She looked back at me once from the porch. I closed the door. I sat on the kitchen floor with Theo for a long time after the police left. He climbed into my lap even though he's almost too big for that now, and I held him and neither of us moved. The candles on the table had burned down. The food sat untouched in its serving dishes, still beautiful looking, still smelling like something I would have enjoyed enormously if I hadn't known what was in it. I didn't cry until much later. There's a specific kind of grief that doesn't arrive right away. The kind that waits until you're safe, waits until your child is asleep and the house is dark and you're finally alone with the full weight of the thing. Then it arrives all at once, sitting on your chest like a stone you can't push off. In the days that followed, the picture came together slowly. The way these things do, in pieces delivered by police detectives and my attorney, and eventually my own memory. The moments I'd ignored because I loved her and didn't want to see. The prescription bottle contained crushed sedative pills. The detective told me it was enough to make me very sick, possibly dangerously so. But the answer to whether it was intended to kill me was complicated by what else they found. Because when they looked more closely, they found evidence of other things. Records I didn't know existed. A life insurance policy in my name that Cassie had taken out 18 months earlier, naming herself as beneficiary. The signature was mine, but I had never signed it. I don't have a clean explanation for that, even now. My attorney says she was likely planning for something more serious, something that would take longer, and the pills were perhaps the beginning of a longer process. I don't let myself think about that for too long. What I've learned since is that Cassie's ex-boyfriend, the quiet, distant one who'd made me uneasy the few times I met him, had left her for someone else. Not just someone. He had left her and filed for custody of their dog, which sounds almost funny except for what the detective told me next. His new partner was someone who worked at my clinic. Someone I'd mentioned to Cassie in passing over the past year. Someone younger than us. Casey had decided, in whatever version of logic was operating inside her, that I had something to do with it, that I had introduced them or encouraged it, or at minimum had known and said nothing. None of that was true. I barely knew the person she was referring to, but truth, the detective told me gently, doesn't always matter in these situations. Sometimes people build a story in their heads, and the story becomes real to them. What terrifies me most isn't what she put in the sauce. It's how easy it was for her to sit across from me and be herself while knowing what she'd done. 14 years of real friendship and real love and real history, and she sat there asking about my week. The case went to trial 8 months later. The prosecutor brought in a toxicologist, Theo's video, the insurance policy, and the text messages they pulled from Cassie's phone, messages to someone I didn't know sent in the weeks before my birthday that I cannot bring myself to quote, but that made the jury go very still. She was convicted on charges of attempted poisoning and insurance fraud. The judge sentenced her to 9 years. I sat in the courtroom through all of it. Theo was with my mother. I thought about bringing him, but decided some things. A 9-year-old doesn't need to see up close, even a 9-year-old who already understands more than most adults. Cassie looked at me once during sentencing. I don't know what I expected to feel, rage or grief or the release of something long held. But I didn't feel any of those things. I just felt tired. Tired and grateful to be alive and present in a hard wooden courtroom chair, which is a strange thing to feel grateful for. But I did. Theo got his first communication device upgrade last spring, a newer tablet with a faster processor and a voice output system that speaks his selections aloud in a child's voice, neutral and clear. The speech therapist says he's using it more fluently every month. A few weeks after we got it set up, he and I were sitting on the back porch after dinner. The days were getting longer and there was still light at 7 o'clock. That pale gold late spring light that makes everything look a little gentler than it is. He picked up his device and typed something. Then he held it out and pressed the button. The voice said, "You always listen to me, Mom." I looked at him. His face was completely composed, the way it gets when he said exactly what he meant. I put my arm around him and pulled him close. "I always will," I said. The thing I have come to understand, in the quiet of the year since my 31st birthday, is that the people who love you don't always make noise about it. Sometimes love is a 9-year-old wedging himself into a 3-inch gap behind the pantry door, with his tablet, recording something he couldn't say out loud, and then standing at the dinner table with both hands flat and shaking his head so hard his hair fell in his face. He couldn't give me words, he gave me everything else. The loudest warning I ever received came from the one person in my life who had never once spoken a word, and the greatest danger I ever faced was sitting across a candlelit table, wearing a warm smile and refilling my wine glass, asking how my week had been. I still think about the candles sometimes. The 2 tall white ones I'd bought at Target and never used, finally lit on the night someone I loved tried to poison me. There's a version of that evening where Theo does nothing, where he climbs back into his chair and decides it isn't his place to interfere, or that I won't listen, or that the gap behind the pantry door is too tight and it isn't worth it. I think about that version more than I'd like to admit. I think about what would have happened to him if it had gone the other way. Not just to me, but to a 9-year-old boy who would have watched his mother get sick and never understood why, because nobody would have thought to ask the child who couldn't speak. He was 9. He had no framework for what he was witnessing. He just knew it was wrong, and he did something about it. That's not instinct, that's character. And character, I've come to believe, is built quietly over years in ways you can't always see happening. I think about Cassie too, and not with the clean anger that would be easier to carry. She was genuinely good to us for a long time. That part wasn't fake. It couldn't have been, not entirely. What happened to her was a slow corrosion of something that started reasonable and ended somewhere I don't have words for. She let a story take root in her head, a story where I was responsible for her pain, and she fed it instead of questioning it, and eventually it crowded out everything else. Her intelligence turned inward and became calculation. Her loyalty curdled into something that looked like love but was really possession. She was capable of so much, and she aimed it at the wrong thing for so long that by the time she walked into my kitchen with that bottle in her pocket, I don't think she experienced it as a choice anymore. That's the most frightening part. Not that she was a monster, but that she wasn't one until she was. The choices we make when we are hurt, when we are jealous, when we feel cheated by life, those choices accumulate. They shape us. Cassie made 1,000 small decisions to nurture her grievance instead of releasing it, to plan instead of grieve, to smile instead of be honest. Each one seemed manageable, I imagine. Each one moved her a little further from the person she'd been when we met as freshmen. Complaining about bad coffee and fire alarms. And Theo made 1,000 small decisions too, to pay attention, to trust what he saw, to act even when acting was hard and frightening, and required him to wedge himself into a 3-inch gap in the dark with a tablet he didn't know for certain would capture anything useful. He had every reason to doubt himself. He did it anyway. That kind of courage doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from being taught, day after day, that what you notice matters, that your instincts are worth trusting, that doing the right thing is worth doing even when you can't explain why in words. I'd like to think I taught him some of that. I'd like to think that all those years of sitting with him and taking his communication board seriously, of never once dismissing what he was trying to say, I'd like to think it showed him that his voice counted, even when it made no sound. He saved my life. Not with strength or speed or anything dramatic. He saved it by being the kind of person who pays attention and doesn't look away. And that is, I've decided, the best thing a person can be. I'm still learning it myself.